Hey guys, it's Matt, welcome to Speed Tutor, and today we're going to be making a stamina system with a stamina bar, and I'm going to show you how to make the UI, script it in code, and be able to control your stamina bar. So be sure to put a like on this video because it would really help me out, and make sure you check out my Patreon because you'll be able to get hold of this script, project, and all the rest on there. So be sure to check that out today. So before we get started, just remember that I'm going to be using the standard FPS controller, which you can find from the Unity standard assets, which is their FPS controller, which does have an FPS controller script. So I've just added the FPS controller script to my scripts folder, just so I can get hold of it more easily. This is just one example of how you can implement stamina with this controller, and it would have a different implementation depending on what controller you're using. But here's something to get you started. So we want to create ourselves the little UI to be able to create the bar like you saw, and for be able to go that down. So we can right click in the hierarchy, choose UI, and then we're just going to choose image. From there, I'm just going to get rid of my image component, and I'm just going to rename this to my stamina bar underscore canvas group. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a component and add a canvas group component. Then I can set the opacity on or off. And then on your canvas group image, just make sure that this is as big as the entirety of the canvas, so you can actually do the extend in the bottom corner if you want to maximize that out. On our canvas, we need to make sure that it's the scale with screen height and size, so we'll set that to 1920 by 1080. I'm going to right click my canvas group, choose UI, choose image. Now you can see that it's put the image in the very center. You can see that now we can see the center line. We can just drag that down to the bottom. I'm just going to scale that down, maybe around that size. I'm going to again scale this out at the bottom, and I'm just going to then keep that center, and we could have it something like that. So that's going to be our background. You can take off raycast target, and you can just set its color to black. So this is going to be our background because you can see that the white bar would transition over the top. We can rename this to stamina slider underscore BG. We're going to duplicate that object now, and because it's below, it's going to be over the top. So then we're just going to call this our stamina slider bar. So that's the one that's going to be affected. So now what we'll do is set this to white in this case. I'm going to choose a sprite which I need. So the sprite which I'm going to use is my 1024 rectangle UI. So it's just a rectangle UI which I've created in Photoshop. And of course you can get all this on my Patreon if you need to get access to it. We can just drag this in bar onto there. We'll get a bunch of options now, and we can set the image type to filled. We can set it to, we don't want to be a radial 360, we want it to be a horizontal. And you can see that when it's horizontal, we can then adjust. When it's horizontal and left, we can go from 1 to 0, and it will look like a slider bar which we just created. So we'll keep it on 1 now. We're all ready to go. Remember the canvas group, you can see that if we set it from 1 to 0, we can fade out all those elements underneath. So now we want to be able to create our script to make this happen, because when we run around it won't actually do anything. Now what we can do is right click in our script folder, go create C#, and then I'm just going to call this our stamina controller, and then we'll open up in Visual Studio. I'm going to get rid of the starting methods here, and we're going to need some variables which are going to control exactly what our stamina will be. I'm just going to add attributes and headers to make sure that it's nice and neat in the inspector, so you can do these as well if you want. But we're going to start by saying we're going to have a player stamina, and this is going to be a public float because we're going to access this from our other script to check if our player's stamina is ever lower than a certain amount, we won't be able to sprint or do something else. So we'll call this our player stamina, set that to 100 0 F, so it's out of 100, because we'll convert our 0 to 1 bar to overall 100. Then below here we're going to have square brackets serialized field, private float max stamina, set that equal to the same value, so we can also set that to 100. We can have serialized field again and have it as private float. In this, I'm going to show you how to use it to affect jumping. So we're going to call this jump cost and then set that equal to 20 because that might be something that we're going to use. And then we're going to have a square brackets hiding inspector because I don't need to see these, but I also want to make them public so they can be used elsewhere. And this is going to be a boolean called has regenerated, so we can tell that if our stamina has already gone to the maximum, we must have regenerated our stamina, and we need to be able to check for that. So then below there, we're going to do hiding inspector, public bool, we are sprinting, set that equal to false, because we sometimes need to check if we're actually sprinting or not. We need to bring up a suggestion. We're going to add another header, which is going to be our stamina affecting rates. So serialize field and choose private float, and I'll call this stamina drain equal to 0.5 F, and again square bracket serialize field private float stamina regen equals 0.5 F, and you can change all these as you want. I'm just going to add a range attribute before these so I can make them a nice little slider to move up and down. Then under here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set some stamina, so what we expect our speed to be affected by, so we can then write serialize field in square brackets again, private integer slowed run speed is equal to 4, and serialize field private integer normal run speed is equal to 8. Then we're going to have a couple of selections to change the UI elements. So we're going to have the serialize field again, private image, but remember up at the top we need a namespace to use Unity's image components and UI components using Unity engine.ui with a semicolon. Now we can access image, and we can say that this is our stamina progress UI, set that equal to null, and one last one here is we can say private canvas group and have that as slider canvas group and set that equal to null too. And I'm just going to have one more variable, which is private first person controller custom, and I'm just going to name this as my player controller. Now we can't get access to that because now we need to go back into Unity. See, our first person controller is named this. I'm just going to rename this to first person controller custom, because if you ever use the normal FPS controller script, it was overwrite this when you import it in. So if we just change that, open that up, public class here, you can see that it's called first person controller. We're just going to not name this to first person controller custom. We'll go back into our stamina script, and you can see that first person controller's custom is still wiggling, so we need to use another namespace which can get access to that. So we need to use unity standard assets dot characters dot first person. So we need to start off writing our script now. We need to find our player controller first off, so we can say void start. So for initialization we can just say that our player controller is equal to get component, because we'll put this script on the same thing as our player controller is, and we'll say first person controller custom, 2 brackets and a semicolon, so this finds it automatically for us. So now we need to check if we're ever sprinting or when we're doing something, we need something to happen. So we'll have a void update and say that if, with an exclamation mark, we are sprinting. So if we are sprinting is false, we can add 2 curly brackets below there and say that if player stamina is ever less than or equal to our maximum stamina minus 0.01, then we can have 2 curly brackets below and say that player stamina plus equals our stamina regen times by time dot delta time, and then we can have a method which updates our stamina. Then under here we can also check, we can say that if our player stamina is ever greater than or equal to our maximum stamina, then we know that we need to potentially set our speed to our normal speed if it's changed, so we need to set to normal speed. Then we can reset our alpha value for the slider, and then we can say has regenerated equals true in this case. So now we're saying that if we're not sprinting, we should be able to regenerate, and I put, but just if it's less than or equal to max stamina minus 0.01, it's just before it gets full, just so that we don't sort of meet any issues down the line. We can create ourselves a method just under here, which is called void update stamina with a bracket. I'm just going to put this as a parameter of integer and set that as value. And then we're going to say that our stamina progress UI dot fill amount is equal to the player stamina divided by our maximum stamina. So this will give us a decimal place value between 0 and 1 based on, if we divide the maximum by the player, we'll always get a decimal placed value. then that will adjust our stamina when we want to visually see it on screen. So then I'll say that if value is ever equal to 0, then we can say that our slider canvas group dot alpha equals 0, and then we can say that else, in any other case, that slider canvas group dot alpha equals 1. So if we ever update the stamina, we can pass in a parameter and we can put 0 or 1 just to update it so we don't have to write it every single time. This helps us make sure that when we're not sprinting, it can tick up. We can update now the UI. We'll just create a simple method to update the jumping. So we'll call this public void stamina jump and have 2 curly brackets below there, and we'll say that if our player stamina is ever greater than or equal to our maximum stamina times by the jump cost divided by the maximum stamina, then our player stamina minus equals the jump cost. Then we're going to make sure that we allow the player to jump, but we'll do that in our other script. And then we can say update stamina, and then in brackets we can say 1 because we want the alpha of that group to appear just for that moment. So now maybe we want to control when we're sprinting what we want to be able to do. So we'll create a public method, so public void sprinting, because we're going to be able to reference this in our other script as well. We'll say that if we have regenerated, or if regenerated equals true, so we should be able to sprint again, we'll say that we are sprinting equals true, because we must be sprinting if that's the point, if this method is called, because we'll check that in our other script. We'll say that player stamina minus equals the stamina drain times by time dot delta time, and then what we can do is we can say update stamina, and in this case we want 1 again. Then we want to say under here that if player stamina is ever less than or equal to 0, we must not have any stamina. Then we can say has regenerated equals false, so if that's the case we won't be able to sprint anymore. Then we can say that we need to slow the player based on whatever we want to do. Then we can say slider canvas group dot alpha equals 0, just because I don't want to update the actual UI again. I just want to disable it to make sure that we don't fall into any issues. So we needed to look at the stamina jump, we need to look at sprinting. In our update we needed to update the stamina, so we can just write update stamina and then put 1 in here. And then for our slider value we just need to do like just before, we can just do slider canvas group dot alpha is equal to 0. So now we need to look at being able to detect when we're going to move, when we're going to sprint, and when we're going to jump from our other script. So we've already written all the logic to be able to control it. So what we can now do is go into our first person custom script, which may look like it's got a lot of scripting, but we're going to look at very specific parts of it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just reference here at the bottom. I'm just going to write a square brackets hidden inspector, because we don't want to actually need to see this. We can just say that public, and we're just going to have this as my stamina controller that I want to access. And we could have underscore stamina controller, just because this is the other script, we need to access some elements from it. And then in the start method, we can actually just say that stamina controller is equal to get component, because it'll be on the same component as this, and we're just going to say the stamina controller with brackets and a semicolon. So we'll found that automatically. So underneath my start method here, I'm just going to create a new method, which is going to be a public void set run speed. Have in brackets, have a parameter of float speed, and then have 2 curly brackets below and say that m underscore run speed is equal to the speed. So we're going to be able to access this method from the other script and be able to change it based on this. So we're not changing the actual variable up here. So m underscore run speed is up here in the variables for the FPS controller. We're only setting it in this script based on what we've passed into. So then we're going to scroll on down until we find the fixed update for jumping. So you can see this bit of code here which says if m underscore jump, then we'll move the direction, we'll play the sound, and we'll make sure that we are jumping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy or cut all that out of there, and I'm just going to then write stamina controller dot stamina jump. So in this case I'm just going to run the method of stamina jump from my other script, and I'm going to create another method up here underscore and call this public void player jump. And under here, what I will do is I will paste all my variables back into there, which change when we jump. So in my other script, you can see that we need to make sure we allow the player to jump. So what we can do now is we can say that player controller dot player jump. So we can access that method so that when we want to jump, we'll just play the player jump method as long as we have detected the input. So when we do jump, we'll run that script. That script in here will run back to here. We'll check if we've got enough stamina, and if we have, we're just going to run that method, which just does the same thing as before. So now we need to look at whether we're sprinting or not. So we need to scroll on down until we get to the input section about whether we're walking, whether our input is working, and all the things that are rolling around in here. Then you can see that under here where it says about left shift, we can just select this end if statement and just drop down a couple of lines, and we're just going to write some lines in here. So we'll say that we'll say m underscore is walking. So if we're walking at any point, we expect we're not sprinting because this script detects it for us. So we'll say that stamina controller dot we are sprinting equals false. So if we're walking, then we can say that if, and then we'll put an exclamation mark, m underscore is walking, and then and an m underscore character controller dot velocity dot square magnitude, which is all used in this script, is greater than 0. So in this case, if we're not walking and we're moving because the velocity of our character is greater than 0, we must be sprinting. So then under here, we can then check that if our stamina controller dot player stamina is greater than 0, then under here we can say that stamina controller dot we are sprinting must be true, and then we can have stamina controller dot sprinting, and we can run that method which was controlling our sprinting. And then under here we can have an else statement and say that m underscore is walking is equal to true, because if we're sprinting and we are moving at some distance, then we can do this. If we're doing anything else, we must be walking at that point. Now we can go back into our stamina controller, and remember for when if we weren't sprinting and we wanted to regenerate, we wanted to set the normal speed in case we had ever hit the maximum if we had run out. So now we can say that player controller dot set run speed, because that was that method we created before to be able to set what that run speed should be, and we can just set that to normal run speed like we'd set up here. And then when we scroll on down to our sprinting method, which we do call when we sprint, we call the sprinting method, and we check if has regenerated. We want to slow the player at that point if our stamina is 0. Again, player controller dot set run speed in brackets is slowed run speed. So now we're just going between these two scripts. This controls all our stamina, but this player controller script just controls when we should and shouldn't be walking, and it will set our other script depending on what inputs that we choose to do. So now we can go back into Unity, make sure that our FPS controller script is on there. We can add our stamina controller script. You can see that player stamina is out of 100, max stamina, jump cost, you can see that stamina drain is 0.5. I'm going to set that to something like 30, and maybe regenerate is only 20. You can see that run speed is 15, so you could have whatever you want. So say that stamina normal speed is 15 again, and slowed is only 5, just like the same as walking. Then we need to add our slider bar, which is the progress, and then the canvas group, which is one here. What we can do is make sure that our canvas group is at alpha of 0. We press play. You can see that when we're pressing play and I move around, nothing is appearing. I can just walk around normally. If I press sprint, you can see that I can sprint and it regenerates when I've used it, and only when it's going down I can let it regenerate. I can sprint at any time because I haven't used up all my stamina. I can jump and it uses up 20 stamina. I can run around and get all the way to the bottom. You can see that my stamina ran out and I can't sprint anymore. If I let go of the sprint key, which I've just done now, and I can stand still, it will get all the way back up, and then I could sprint again. And again, if I let go of sprint and I press it, it will stop the stamina bar going back up, and we still won't be able to sprint until we get to our maximum stamina that we wanted. So I hope this helped everybody out and you like this tutorial. Do let me know what you think. If you've got any tips or suggestions about making this better, you can get access to this script and the entire project on my Patreon. Be sure to come and join my Discord if you want to chat. Check out my great assets on the Unity store, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.